Hello, everybody, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on when you're listening to this. Uh, I'm going to be doing the children's story today. My name is Dawg. Uh, our story comes from World War II. It is a bomber crew in the South Pacific. They're flying what is called a B 25. This was a patrol type bomber, a two engine. It was the kind of bomber that was used on the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. This twin engine bomber has quite the range for such a small airplane. It also had a crew of usually five. And the thing is, this particular bomber was on a mission with its bombing group. Uh, but they got separated somehow during the mission and everything after they dropped their bombs. And on their way back to their base, they started running into a headwind. And this headwind kept blowing them off course and using up what little fuel reserve they had. Finally, they had a choice. They could either ditch the airplane in the ocean and take their chances, or they saw a small island in a chain of islands that had a long, flat beach. Now, they knew that this set of islands was in Japanese territory behind enemy lines, but they had no other options, so they decided to land on that long beach. After they got safely down and the plane was taxied to the end of the beach, they proceeded to try to set up a camp. They were trying to decide what they were going to do. They knew that sooner or later, if there was no Japanese on the island, that there would at least be a patrol boat come through looking the islands over. And they knew if they were spotted, they would be captured. And the last thing they wanted was to go to a Japanese prison camp. As they were setting up their camp, it turns out that the navigator of this particular airplane was also a pastor. And every time that he was not actually working on setting up camp or doing other essential things, he was on his knees and he was praying to God. Now, one of the other crew members started to get a little upset at the pastor and everything because it seemed like every time he looked around, he was in prayer. Even though the pastor was working just as hard as everybody else, this one crew member was having a problem. And he mentioned it to the plane's captain, and he also mentioned it to the co-pilot. Now, as they went on and everything, they set up a rotation of who would be on guard that night. And it was a moonlit night, but there was also some clouds. Well, the thing is, the guy who was always complaining about the chaplain, he was not scheduled to be on guard duty until the very last shift just before dawn. But for some reason, something kept speaking to him and woke him up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And he tried to roll over and go back to sleep. But this voice kept telling him, go to the beach. You need to go to the beach. Well, when he looked around, he was trying to see who was talking to him. But the other members of the crew were asleep, all except for the one who was on guard duty. And that was the navigator, the pastor. And he was at the far end of the circuit that they walked to patrol around the aircraft. So he rolled over and this gunner tried to go back to sleep, but he couldn't. Finally, he got up and he decided he was going to walk down to the beach. Maybe if he did that, the voice in his head would be silent and he could get some rest before he had to go on guard duty. Needless to say, he walked down to the beach and the moon was hid behind the clouds. Well, the moon peeked out for just a moment and he thought he saw something bobbing in the water. Now he became worried at first, but finally the moon come out from behind a cloud long enough for him to see. There was a drum of some kind floating in the water. Now, this was not a drum like some people think that you would beat with drumsticks. This is what they called an oil drum. It was bigger than a 55-gallon barrel. Needless to say, he got to looking, and finally he realized that if he didn't pull it up onto the shore, it was going to float away. So as he started wrestling it up onto the shore, the moon went behind a cloud. Just as he got it up a little higher out of the water line, the moon come back out, and he realized he was looking at a great big container of aviation gasoline. Needless to say, he got all excited. He run back to the plane and he started yelling for all his companions to come help him get the drum up the beach to the airplane. Well, everyone come in or got up, and they were all thinking he'd lost his mind. And he finally convinced them to come down to the beach with him. Well, once they got down there, they saw that he wasn't crazy and that it was a full container of aviation gas. Now, aviation gas is special gas for the engines of an airplane. It's higher octane than normal gasoline, specially designed. They got that big old container rolled up to the airplane, and they managed to transfer every drop of gas out of it into the airplane. That's when the navigator realized that drum was an American drum and everything. All the labeling on it was in English, so he proceeded to get all the numbers off the drum. And just as dawn was coming up, they had finished refueling the plane and realized they had just enough gas with no headwind to get them back to their base. So they took off. When they landed at their base a few hours later and everything, their mechanics checked their airplane over, and they told them that there was less than a gallon of gas in each wing tank when they landed. It was several weeks later before they found out where that drum of aviation gas had come from. By then, their air base had been moved to a more forward area as the attack in the Pacific continued. And they found out that that drum of gasoline had been kicked off of a barge that was unloading a supply ship at another place. That drum of gasoline had been floating around in the Pacific for almost 3 weeks before they ever landed on that island. It had traveled almost 1,000 miles in its drift to come to that island. That shows that God answers our prayers before we can even pray them. He knew that there was going to be a need for that airplane crew. And you know what? That gunner found out that that pastor was not being lazy. And, he became a Christian too. So you see, God answers your prayers before you can even ask. And sometimes when he doesn't answer your prayers, it's usually because it's good for you, because it's something you don't actually need. But we need to remember to stay faithful in our prayers, because God hears everything that we ask. And he will always answer us in a way that may not be what we want, but it's just what we need, just in time. Y'all have a blessed Sabbath.